Thank you for having me. It really, yeah, design control and validation can be fun. You know, you have to at least have a catchy title to get people to show up, even if it might be a small fib. So encourage you guys to ask questions as we're running. My background, I work most recently now for NextCure. We are a next generation immune oncology company. So as many of you may know, immune oncology has been sort of a revolution in cancer care over the last 3 to 5 years. So we're working on even next generation therapies to what's in the market today. And my most recent background was with Personal Genome Diagnostics, which is a oncology diagnostic company, primarily utilizing next generation sequencing technology. And we deployed a centralized model. So large, big data on next generation sequencing with fully automated bioinformatics pipelines so that the users, wouldn't have to think about doing all the analysis themselves. So some sample to answer solutions. So that's where most of my background is coming from in giving you guys this presentation. It is a regulated environment, which I understand some of you are not in, and some of you might be thinking about pursuing. But really, I think the principles of design control and some of the stuff we'll talk about is applicable to pretty much any business or any technology. So the joys of cross-functional development here. This is kind of a fun cartoon that we have from old software development. I think it's the tire swing dilemma, and how each sort of cross-functional team member understands the requirements. So how we think the customer explained it, how a project leader understood it, how an analyst actually designed it, how a programmer wrote it, how the business consultant described it, looks nice and bougie, how it was documented, which is a big thing on design control, is really primarily documentation. What operations actually ended up installing, how the customer was billed, how it was supported, sadly, often an afterthought, but what the customer really needed. So this just sort of demonstrates, I think, the headspace of when you get complex cross-functional teams and when you're doing things like, nanoparticle development or satellite optical technologies. I'm not even sure I caught everything in the pitches that you guys gave. I'm sure there's a lot of players involved. And obviously at the core of it is some sort of customer. So what does that mean? From my perspective, it's really being able to document user needs. And users can be different people, right? You could have an application that's directly going to someone on their phone. You can have a business-to-business transaction interacting with the government. Obviously, users are very different. In the world of oncology, we have patients, we have payers, we have the physicians who order the test or the drug. So there's a lot of stakeholders to sort of hold in alignment as we're developing our products. And these are just some examples of kind of the categories of user needs that you guys can consider as you're designing or thinking about prototyping or sort of drafting some of your preliminary ideas for product or service. And really at the core of user needs is the ability to sort of draft and craft requirements. So you have to be able to communicate your input into the design. And again, when you're dealing with cross-functional teams or people with different backgrounds or experiences, getting everyone aligned to what problem we're solving and why are the things that you want in the product important. From a regulated side, you need to make these things measurable and testable. Because we'll show here in the next slide, there's sort of stages of development where you have inputs into the design. You can go through some feasibility to test things out, but then eventually you need to verify that you've met the requirements of the design and then validate the design at the end as well. And Requirements need to be focused, so you need to know your audience. Like I said, depending on who your stakeholders are, these might come from different places. And if you're working with development teams who aren't familiar with customer engagement or who your target market is or the end users, then it's really helpful, I think, to be able to explain to them a why. Like, why do we need to build it this way? Why does it have to have that feature? I think that's something that can be really valuable in communicating up and down the business chain, down to scientists, especially. Works with several, development scientists and engineers in my past and current role. So giving them insight into the business, I think, is really helpful to get them to understand and think creatively about the problems that they're solving in the products that they're building. And then again, in a design control area, you kind of want to make them free of specific content and methods. So you want to let the experts think on their own, come up with their own solutions. And this becomes sort of an iterative back and forth with folks that write requirements or user needs or user stories, for those of you who might be familiar more in the software realm, with the people actually, boots on the ground doing the work. So, open question to the group. Anyone want to take a stab at suggesting how you might draft some user needs for an airplane?
Maybe do some customer discovery and find out what customers might want on an airplane.
Yeah, sure thing.
Interviewing people who fly via airplane frequently would be good. The customer input.
Yep, good customer input is good. How do you then take that input, do you think, and can you guys give me an example of like the user needs an airplane with 3 feet of legroom? I don't know, something like that. What kind of requirements do you think would go into designing something like an airplane?
We might have an understanding of how far away destinations would be, and then that would give us a sense of fuel requirements to meet the journey.
Yeah, sure thing. So fuel requirements, user comfort is a recurring theme. You've got pilots that have to fly and all of your flight attendants that have to serve and keep you safe. So there's a lot of cross-functional stakeholders there as well. All right, so getting into design control, really all it is a phase-gated process that reduces risk and sort of enhances your chance of success. And there are codes of federal regulations written by the FDA on this. There's also other international standards like ISO that exist, which I didn't include in any of the deck. To me, they're a little bit boring. There's experts that know what they are and can guide you on those types of things. But the concept basically is regulatory agencies give you guidelines around design control, and the whole thing is built around understanding the risks of your device or your drug to your patients, your stakeholders, even the people in the lab manufacturing perhaps what you're building. All of that has to be considered in the design and implementation. And you're sort of iteratively going along this chain to reduce that risk as best you can before launching to the market. So these are some typical stage gates of design control. You can have sort of robust prototype or concept phases where you're spending a lot of time, interviewing your stakeholders, getting feedback from the market on what those things are, crafting your user need requirements so that the developers of the technology can then go away and determine how they're going to build what you need them to build and how they're going to test that they built the right thing. So engineering and design activities also follow into that, and verification really is, did we build the right thing? It's proving, okay, here is our set of user needs, and at the end of verification, we think we built the right thing. Validation is, did we build the right thing for the right intended use? or the right audience. So if you're building a diagnostic test to select patients for therapy, did you validate that clinically, right? Or can my device actually select the right patients for therapy? Or can my drug actually, have an impact in the patient population that I'm going after, for example? So those are kind of the terms of verification and validation. Typically, verification is done internally by your own organization, just proving to themselves that they built the right thing. And then validation is usually some sort of external validation to prove in other people's hands that you built the right thing. Another sort of similar content, different view of some of the same concepts of verification and validation, but I wanted to include this slide because you can have some iterations, and it also overlays these concepts, I think, of quality assurance over your design control. So, a lot of companies that utilize design control also utilize a lot of planning tools and documentation tools. And really all it is saying, we're planning to do this, we've done this, here's the evidence that we did it. And creating yourself a record really is most of the lift on design control and being quality compliant. And it doesn't end when you launch the product, of course, right? So there are post-design control, post-market surveillance things that you still need to do. And hopefully you can iterate and make improvements depending on what the product is. Which kind of takes us to a concept of what is an MVP and or proof of concept. To me, those things are pretty much the same. In the world of drugs, it's hard to just release an MVP and iterate because it's quite hard. I guess your iterations are probably going through, each phase of clinical trial. But for diagnostics or for, research use tools or many other products out there, it's good. It's fine to iterate, and coming to this sort of cycle of having ideas, interacting with your customers and getting their feedback, building something, having something tangible for them, to have their hands on, touch, feel, test, give input on, measure their feedback and input there, and assess the data of their usability, or however, there's multiple ways to sort of get in and interrogate with your customers, how they like it, what they need next, things of that nature. And then iterating this design again. And MVPs really reside, it's not just a minimal product. Meaning if you go back to our user needs, there was some, 25 chunks of types of features. Minimum is not achieving one of those. Minimum is achieving probably one of those in every category, even though when you started, you had maybe 5, 6, or 7 in every category, if that makes any sense. So you still need a whole product that solves some sort of problem, but it doesn't have to be the perfect thing. So that's sort of the concept of an MVP and a proof of concept design. And all of this time, of course, you're checking in on your customer needs and user feedback and using that to iterate into a second design. And if you're in design control, you're documenting this the whole way as you're going. One thing I did want to point out, though, on viability consideration is the manufacturing side. Depending on, if we're in software applications, this is less of an issue, but if we're in physical, tangible products, this should also be considered, I would argue, in some of your upfront user needs. And in this case, the user is the business. We need to keep an eye on the fact that it's got to be manufactured in the end. And if you are the company specializing in the manufacturability, your resource constraints and limitations, so it has to fit within that world. Or you might be pursuing a contract manufacturer or something of that nature, and it has to fit in the constraints of their world, if you will. So there's several things to think about, right? On efficiency of that, the quality control processes that is going through manufacturing. You want to have backup vendors for any of the materials or supplies, that you are going to market with, because of course you don't want to run into any kind of a product shortage once you're out there. And obviously considering cost of goods, labor, and sort of supply chain quality and notifications and regulation that you have over your own supplier. So if they go out of business, you don't want to get left in the lurch. You want to make sure that you have, contracts in place that give you enough lead time, notification, buyouts of materials, things of that nature. So just wanted to plug that up there. I know a lot of the companies are pretty early, but just to have, a little nit in your brain on if there's tangible product being built, to always make sure that we're considering the whole product life cycle and all of the components involved. So I think just in summary on design control and product validation, the customer is always at the center. And this is always a balance of their wants and needs to the product, getting them the right level of satisfaction, of course, and supporting what you've launched, as well as any safety concerns if you are in a medical field, or any field really where a safety concern to end users or even manufacturer could be of concern. And we're doing this all in a background sort of wall of risk, and having cross-functional conversations and making sure, that you've taken all of this into account in your design, and really designing your products and designing your experiments to minimize risk as best you can. And document the heck out of it if you happen to be in a regulated area is the take home.